pros and cons of genetically modified organisms and what happens when you start pulling on that GMO thread. We've got some interesting findings to share, all within the big picture of our Catholic faith today. On The Simple Truth, we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. I'm Jim Havens. It's Wholeness and Healing Monday, fighting to cultivate the health of the whole person, mind, body, and soul. With our co-host, my lovely wife, Becky Havens. She is a Catholic wife and mother with a passion and calling to educate people about the importance of caring for our bodies that the Lord has blessed us with by living a healthy lifestyle. She helps others to think outside the cultural norms and to be their own advocate while not falling into the many pressures of modern medicine. She's the author of Toxin Free in 12 Months, a 12-month guide to help you to transition over to a toxin-free lifestyle. Also wrote a boycott list of over 600 pro-abortion companies. You can get those resources for free and more at her website, safehavensmama.com. That's safehavensmama.com. Our topic today, the pros and cons of GMOs. Our disclaimer, certainly a good day to make this loud and clear. We're not doctors. We're not scientists, just regular people looking to live well and raise our family. We believe in objective truth, in asking questions when things do not make sense. We're not giving medical advice here, but we do want to offer a forum here today. We know a thing or two. There's still a ton we don't know. We have some personal experiences, as do you, and we would love to hear from you as the show goes on. We'll put the phone number out there. We'd love to have you call in with any question or comment that you have. We'll also get to the morning survey responses as well. So, Becky, you picked this topic today, and going into this on GMOs, really, I didn't have any dog in the fight, just looking to see what the evidence is on this. Started pulling the thread. We'll get to that later, my experience of this, but this got real interesting real quick. But you knew that already heading into this thing. You picked this topic on GMOs. Becky, what's your interest in this topic? Why do you pick it?
Sure. I feel like this has been a hot topic for years in the health community, and just like many other things, it's being, misled into all different directions. And so, when we do a deep dive into things like this, it helps us to understand where the truth is and where the facts are coming from. And I just feel like when it comes to GMOs, even just when you think about what it is, it doesn't seem like it's in line with the way God created things to be. So anytime that you're dismantling something in a natural way, it seems off. It doesn't always mean that it is wrong, but it's always good to take a look at topics like this to see why this is even needed and what are the long-term effects. And so it's really interesting as you start to research and dive in a little bit more what actually is going on. And there's so much behind it, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in the morning survey, we asked people, do you know what GMOs are? Just about everybody said yes. And then we asked, do you try to avoid GMOs? And again, just about everybody said yes. I guess I would say maybe kind of, and I think so, to the answers of those heading into this today. I think I remember GMOs being a big thing, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago, hearing some stuff about this and saying like, yeah, I think I'd like to avoid that till there are some more studies. But yeah, then it's been off the radar. Haven't really thought much about it. But I do see here, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, GMO seeds are used to plant over 90% of all corn, cotton, and soy grown in the United States, which means that many of the foods you eat likely contain GMOs. And so this is something that does certainly affect us all. It's prevalent throughout the United States, throughout the culture of our food and even the clothes we wear. And so this exists. This is something that we ought to kind of dive a little bit deeper on, try to understand it. So where do we begin when we start looking at GMOs, Becky?
I would start with, when did they come into play and why? And it seems in this case, they've been around for about 30 years. And it really seems like the motivation was, we need more. We want to make more money. Mass production of corn. Corn is used for so many things. If you just look in the ingredients of basically everything within the middle structure of a grocery store, that's where you get all the ultra processed foods and such. Corn is in just about everything. So yeah, it made sense that if they want to keep producing foods to sell nationwide, they need to make corn readily available. And as with all crops, we know that insects can be a really big problem. And so they found a way to make it, resistant to insects destroying the crops. And so that was the idea behind it. Whether or not it was a safe or a good idea, that was the idea behind it, it seems. And so they kind of took off from there and realized, okay, this is working. What else can we do? And over the years, it seems like it's getting into everything. And I think along with that, though, which is good, is a lot of, it has to be labeled on a lot of different foods. And that's been even within the last few years, thanks to certain laws that have passed. So you can look on a label and it can say contains bioengineered ingredients. You can look on a label and see the stamp of non-GMO, that one label that has like the farm on it or something. And it can be pretty guaranteed that it's free of GMOs. So you have a better idea of what you're getting in your foods, whereas, 10 years ago, you had no idea, and it could have easily still been in there. And so I think it's a really big thing that is affecting a lot of people on both sides. I think there's a lot of people who want to make a lot of money, and so this is a great way to do it. And that's my take on it, is that it's not a good thing, and it should not be in the food system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you take a look at what GMO means, there's various definitions. I think this is a pretty standard sense of it, though. Purdue University's website states the following, quote, GMO stands for genetically modified organism. Let's break it down word by word. Genetically refers to genes. Genes are made up of DNA, which is a set of instructions for how cells grow and develop. Second is modified. This implies that some change or tweak has been made. Lastly, we have the word organism. When it comes to GMOs, many people only think of crops, yet an organism isn't just a plant. It refers to all living things, including bacteria and fungi. With that in mind, GMOs are living beings that have had their genetic code changed in some way, while conventional breeding, which has been going on for centuries, involves mixing all of the genes from two different sources. Producing a GMO is much more targeted. Rather than crossing two plants out in the field, they insert a gene or two into individual cells in a lab, end of quote. For pros regarding GMOs, why people do this, I think Becky mentioned a little bit of that, but this is a 2014 meta-analysis of the impacts of genetically modified crops that says the following. On average, GM technology adoption has reduced chemical pesticide by 37%. It's increased crop yields by 22% and increased farmer profits by 68%. Yield gains and pesticide reductions are larger for insect-resistant crops than for herbicide-tolerant crops. Yield and profit gains are higher in developing countries than in developed countries. So kind of interesting there when you start to think about that, specifically this distinction between the insect-resistant crops and the herbicide-tolerant crops, that the insect-resistant crops have the greater pesticide reduction, which kind of makes sense. As you dive into this, a lot of things are kind of murky. So they're genetically modifying this seed and making it either insect-resistant or herbicide-tolerant, meaning that it can withstand more of the chemicals that are put onto it, more of the pesticides. And so it doesn't necessarily reduce pesticides in all of these instances. Sometimes the pesticides are still being sprayed. It's just that the crops are not going to be, they're going to be more resistant to the pesticide, meaning they're not going to be killed or damaged by them. More will survive through the pesticide application. So now you almost have a double pesticide effect on that crop, it seems, from the seed level and then also being sprayed on it. Some of them, however, these insect-resistant crops, since they're already insect resistant, wouldn't maybe need as much pesticides or any. So kind of murky, kind of weeding through all of this stuff. But yeah, interesting. There are good reasons that people put out there for going forward with these GMOs. But again, no long-term studies because this has only been with us about 30 to 40 years. So that's something to be aware of. Becky, any further thoughts on it?
Yeah, it seems that when you are, double spraying these crops and it's not killing the plant, but it's likely killing everything else that it's touching. So think of like the birds. That's been a big issue with a lot of environmentalists that, the wildlife is decreasing in farmland because of the heavy use of the sprays. And we all know that the fertilizers, especially the Roundup, they do cause cancer. That's not something that's hidden. That's something that even the WHO will admit. And that's still being sprayed. For some reason, that's still allowed in the United States, which is crazy to me. There has to be other ways. Other countries do other things. So I'm not sure why we're still doing this. It's mind-boggling. And then they think that it's okay just to sell it to people to eat. And it's dangerous. And so the people who are pushing for the GMOs, I would say I wouldn't trust them at all, because we've seen that they don't care that their pesticides are causing cancer or have carcinogenic effects on people who use them. And so it seems, what's their motivation? And I have a hard time trusting their motives, and therefore it seems like it's not a good idea to use GMOs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to pull on that thread. I'll show you what I found out today. I was quite surprised when I started looking into this. But yeah, I think the WHO even does admit that there are like 300,000 deaths. I don't know if that's per year or what it is with respect to the Roundup, but they're saying, oh, but it's not dangerous in terms of the food we're eating. That's just, I think their argument is that's killing like the workers that are using it day in and day out, but that can't be good for anybody. And we ought to care about those workers as well. So that doesn't seem like a very good excuse. But yeah, we've got the FDA, we've got a lot of big organizations saying this is all safe, nothing to see here. We'll have more when we get back. Stay tuned.
Exorcists generally identify 3 categories of activities and experiences that open a person to demonic possession. We can think of these categories as doors for demonic attacks on the person. They invite demons in, but they do not always result in an actual demonic possession. There is also demonic oppression and demonic obsession. There's also just hanging on to the sin, right? And not removing yourself from the sin, which happens to be door number 1, he tells us. So what are the 3 categories of activity that can open a person to demonic possession that most exorcists are in agreement upon? Patterns of sin that are not left, that are not departed from, patterns of sin, the occult, and being a victim of trauma. Now that last one kind of sounds harsh, because the person's a victim after all, it's not their fault. Well, it's a question of healing though. Are they healed from that trauma?
That's Sermons for Everyday Living from 6 to 7 a.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Becky Havens. We are talking about the pros and cons of GMOs today. And as I started to do some digging on this topic, got some clips here I want to share with you. And Becky, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on these today as well. But I found this video, a 2017 video entitled The Science of GMOs. So that sounds interesting. I'm looking for some good data. And when I go to it, there were major red flags here that I just were quite surprising to find. And I just want to share some of them with you. So this first one that I'm going to share, so this is a doctor of molecular and physiological plant biology. And so right away here, being asked about the definition of GMOs, even just getting to a definition, seems to want to confuse a lot of things. Here's the clip.
The term isn't really so useful for advancing discussions about sustainable agriculture. And that's because the term seems to me means something different to everyone. And the Food and Drug Administration has stated that it's scientifically meaningless. And that's because everything we eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, has been genetically altered in some manner. And so, for an example, some foods have been developed through a process of chemical or irradiation mutagenesis, which introduce random changes in the genome. Some are developed through conventional breeding or hybridization. And genetic engineering is a technique where you can take a gene from any species and put it into a plant. So you could take a gene from a virus, for example, and put it into a plant.
Okay. So immediately, what was that? You can put a virus into a plant? Okay, that's concerning. such a technology couldn't possibly ever get into the wrong hands, like, say, a population reductionist who buys up 270,000 acres of United States farmland and has a major foundation that works with infectious diseases. Just kidding, YouTube. I'm sure Bill Gates is completely wonderful and harmless, and this technology would only ever be used for good purposes by those in power. But I do want to give you all a fact. Gates is the largest landowner in the U.S. with 270,000 acres of farmland. That's a fact that is something you can be sure of. But that issue aside, about putting viruses in the plants, what is this doctor of molecular and physiological plant biology trying to convince us of? She's trying to tell us that all of our food is genetically modified, quote, in some manner. So don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. But what did she do in her little lesson? She pretended that all modifications are equal, equating that which has been done for hundreds or thousands of years, natural breeding, with genetic engineering, trying to say that these are the same things or try to conflate these, confuse the issue, which this genetic engineering has only been around for about 30 to 40 years. Why is she trying to tie these two together? She wants us to completely accept the GMOs and suspend our skepticism. But the more she talks, the more skeptical I get. Here's the next clip. Here it is.
But what we do know is that every major scientific organization in the world, including the National Academy of Sciences, the European Food Safety Authority, and many other organizations, have concluded that the process of genetic engineering is no more risky than conventional breeding. And in fact, genetic engineering has been used for 40 years. It's been used in cheeses, in medicine, and in crops. And there hasn't been a single case of harm to human health or the environment. And I think it's important to remember that these are the same organizations that most of us trust when it comes to the safety of vaccines or the effects of a changing climate.
All right. So that one doesn't hold up too much. From 2017 when this video was put together. So this was made, I think this video was made mostly to convince skeptics on the left. And this, again, was in 2017, this video came out before these organizations were very much exposed for their anti-science ideological bias during the COVID assault on humanity. But also, according to the website US Right to Know, this doctor, Dr. Ronald, was the founding director of a group called, launched in 2014 at UC Davis to train faculty and students to promote genetically engineered foods, crops, and pesticides. The group does not fully disclose its funding. Emails indicate that Dr. Ronald collaborated on messaging to discredit critics of genetically engineered foods. In one case, she proposed to organize a boycott against the Chipotle restaurant chain over its decision to offer and promote non-GMO foods. Dr. Ronald is on the advisory board as of 2018 of the Cornell Alliance for Science, a PR campaign based at Cornell University that promotes the GMOs and pesticides using agrochemical industry messaging funded primarily by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She receives compensation from agrochemical companies to speak at events where she promotes GMOs to key audiences that companies seek to influence, such as dietitians. She was also featured prominently in Food Evolution, a documentary film about genetically engineered foods. And that video, that 2017 video I'm taking these clips from, that's actually a video where it's really a promo piece for that film, where the filmmaker Scott Hamilton Kennedy and Neil deGrasse Tyson, who did the voiceover, are part of the interview there. It turns out the film was funded by the trade group Institute for Food Technologists. Dozens of academies have called the film propaganda, and several people interviewed for the film described a deceptive filming process and said their views were taken out of context. Believe it or not, these two, the filmmaker and deGrasse Tyson, have teamed up again. They have a new documentary film coming out in May about vaccines. And so there's more as I pull on this thread, but that's just the initial bit of what I found. Red flags all over the place. So to me, just the amount of red flags when you start digging on this is rather alarming and concerning. Becky, your thoughts?
Right. When she says that GMOs have never done harm to anyone, she's completely lying, because there are cases where they've used GMOs in plants, and getting back to what you shared about the viruses, and it actually created a virus among the certain crops, and then that was distributed, and people were getting very sick. I can't find the information right now, but I read it earlier, and quite a few people died from that case, and that's publicly known. There are also times when they've created a virus, whether they created it or it just happens to get into a crop, that was close to hepatitis B. So this is not like something that is super safe. That can actually happen, where viruses are in the crops and then it's distributed and people are getting the virus. So the fact that she's completely denying that and saying it's so safe. I mean, even just listening to her talk and hearing her say that, it's so easy to say, like, this lady's kind of nuts. Like, you can tell she's lying. You can tell she's being paid. It does not make sense. And so there are a lot of people like that. It's actually really difficult to find information on this unless you dig a little bit deeper, because everything that pops up is in favor of GMOs. I think the first video I watched that kind of threw me, because I thought it was going to be against it. He goes on to say, the first thing he says is, from the standpoint of myself and all these other people, as population control theorists and climate change advocates. And I'm thinking right away, yes, if those are the people who are in favor of GMOs, this is a problem, because that is a really easy way to control the population, is with our food system. And so it makes sense that someone like Bill Gates is getting into that, because if you can control the food, you can control the people.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Ronald continues on. This is always rather interesting when you hear these sorts of remarks by people in the scientific community, so-called scientific community, that they say there's a scientific consensus on this and this and this. And these same people would not say there's a scientific consensus when it comes to the scientific fact that human life begins at conception, fertilization. There ought to be a rock solid scientific consensus there, because it's 100% a scientific fact. Yeah, they want to deny that, but tell us, well, there's scientific consensus in all these other areas. Here's Dr. Ronald, one more clip. Here it is.
The scientific consensus is very clear. It doesn't matter if you live in France or if you live in the United States. The scientific community has reached a consensus. But you see that these are three hot topics: vaccines, climate change, and so-called GMOs, that have been extremely politicized, making it very, very difficult for consumers to really access accurate science-based information.
All right. So we should just trust them, just like we should trust them on vaccines and climate change. I mean, all right. So I think she thought maybe that was going to hold up better over the years. Looking back on that 2017 video, that thing doesn't hold up at all. Everything she's telling us to trust all crumbled into dust through that COVID assault on humanity. So not looking good here as far as the scientific argument being put forth, at least by people like this. I mean, this discredits them, even if they do have some scientific grounding. Why are they putting forth this propaganda if they do? It's just, to me, major red flag. And I want to share this. This is from an op-ed entitled "Food Evolution Documentary Supports GMOs, but Not Science," by a doctor that was reviewing that 2016 film. Quote, "By largely conflating potential harm from GMOs with food safety, the film ignores the many other legitimate concerns about the technology. While food safety has been a major concern of many GMO activists, many biological and social scientists, as well as other activists, have focused attention on concerns about the concentration of the GMO seed industry, the nexus of GMOs with environmentally and socially harmful industrial agriculture, patents, negative environmental consequences of GMOs, and loss of food sovereignty. The film almost entirely ignores these issues, end of quote. So we're going to play a video in the next section that really I thought was quite well done, showing why you don't really need GMOs and why there are much better solutions. But yeah, when you pull this thread, it's all about the money. They want us to think that this is the only solution and we've got to do it this way. But when you pull on the thread some more, you see that there are a few big companies on the top of this pyramid who are profiting big time, who have all the money motivation you would need to be putting forth this propaganda and trying to tell us this is the only way to go. This is the solution. This is what we've got to do. But yeah, major red flags here, Becky.
Right. So what that woman was also saying is it's making it difficult for consumers to obey us, basically, is what she was saying. So it's all about the power as well. They want control, and they don't like it when people speak up. They don't like it when people ask questions because it's going to stir up the pot, and maybe, just maybe, people will wake up and see, like, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a good idea. And they don't like that. They don't like that and when it comes to vaccines. They don't like it when it comes to GMOs or climate change or population control. They want to do what they want to do. And when people speak up about it, that means they're conspiracy theorists or they have dangerous agendas and they're going to come after you. It's ridiculous. It's people having a sense of what's right and wrong. And we ought to step up and say when we see what corruption is, right?
Yeah, and we are equipped for this. Those of us who are firmly pro-life and are not going anywhere and will not compromise, we know the scientific fact that life begins at conception, fertilization. We say we should not be killing innocent human beings, our littlest brothers and sisters. And so we know how they've been lying to us in this area and just putting forth propaganda and flooding the zone with propaganda through the media, through so-called science and law and everywhere. So we can see it when they're doing it elsewhere as well. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here talking about GMOs, pulling the thread on GMOs here today and seeing what we find. Phone lines are open now. If you do want to call in with any question or comment, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. But first, the Station of the Cross has partnered with mycatholicwill.com. As we reflect upon our lives, our families, our journey to heaven, you can have some peace of mind when the unexpected happens by creating a no-cost My Catholic Will. You can learn more at mycatholicwill.com/the Station of the Cross and use the referral code 14 stations. That's 14 stations. There's even an option to include the Station of the Cross in your will should you want to make sure that this resource is available for generations to come. That's mycatholicwill.com/the Station of the Cross with the no cost referral code 14 stations. All right, back to this discussion on GMOs. Let me put this forward before we get to that final clip. I thought this was also interesting. This is from that op-ed I mentioned earlier. It says the discussion is limited to food safety in this propaganda film that was made, Food Evolution. But it says, but even for this narrow topic, when it comes to food safety, the film gets the science wrong. It says, for example, the film refers to a peer-reviewed paper from 2012 by Charles Benbrook that first documented the higher use of herbicides in recent years in the U.S. due to engineered crops. The film then argues that the amount of pesticides used is not the important point, but rather the toxicity of the pesticides, and that glyphosate is less toxic than herbicides it replaced. To cement this critical point, a figure is flashed on the screen, apparently from an authoritative source, that shows glyphosate with apparently lower toxicity than other herbicides. A graph is shown depicting supposedly decreasing toxicity of herbicides over time. Unfortunately, this analysis is wrong because it ignores the actual measures of toxicity used by regulators like the U.S. EPA. The measure of toxicity in the film is the dose needed to rapidly kill 50% of the exposed population, so-called acute short-term toxicity. This is a seriously incomplete measure of overall toxicity, which should include long-term or chronic toxicity, such as the ability to cause cancer or diseases like Parkinson's. Most herbicides, including most that glyphosate has replaced, have relatively low acute toxicity, so it is not usually a practical concern, while chronic toxicity can be more important. The most prominent international body that evaluates carcinogenicity, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, published a widely discussed evaluation of glyphosate in 2015, well before Food Evolution was finished, that concluded that the herbicide was a probable carcinogen. But the assessment, which contradicts the film's assertion about the safety of glyphosate, is not even mentioned in the film. The assessment was conducted by 17 highly qualified and independent scientists who came to their conclusion unanimously. When a proper assessment of toxicity is made, glyphosate can no longer be considered generally less toxic to people than the herbicides it replaced. So really, it's just a way to use language to confuse people and to lie to them, basically, and give them propaganda and say this is completely safe and there's no toxicity, when it's just not measuring all the different types of toxicity, not measuring really the longer chronic form of toxicity, such as the ability to cause cancers and diseases like Parkinson's. Kind of seems important that you'd want to include that, and this study was already out there and they ignored it. So again, just more red flags on this when you pull at it. And I'll tell you, there's enough red flags when I pull at this that it is very clear very quickly there's something wrong here, and I want to avoid GMOs as far as possible. So we want to get into that discussion in a minute as well. What can we do to really avoid them? But Becky, anything further you want to share on this now?
Yeah, I mean, it's so obvious that glyphosate is dangerous, that it causes cancer. It also causes liver and kidney damage, major issues to reproductive and developmental issues in children, risks for pregnant women and children. There's so many side effects that they have come across, and yet there are big organizations that have come out and said, nope, it's totally safe and don't worry about it. You could use it on your lawn, you can use it on your food, and no worries. But even if there was just one or two studies that said it was dangerous, that should be enough for people to say, okay, this might not be safe. But then you have the big guns out there, like the EPA, saying there's no evidence that it's a developmental or reproductive toxin. You don't have no higher risk. It's all false. It's like there are so many studies saying that that's not true. And so if we read between the lines, if we use our minds and our reason in the way that God has given us, then we should be able to see, like, there is something wrong. These people are lying to us. We've seen this in the past with other toxins where they have completely covered up dangers. They don't share the full truth of it because they have a lot of money in it, and there's a lot of people working at jobs where they need that. That's what they use. So it would be a complete disaster for these big companies to have to, give into that. But there are settlements that took place as well for people who have gotten different cancers and lymphomas from using glyphosate. And so the fact that it's sprayed on all conventional flour, wheat, oats, even, it's pretty much in everything. And if you're eating that every day, there's no wonder, with that, between that and the GMOs, that the cancer rates are so high for people, especially young people, which should not be happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're going to get to avoiding all of this in the final segment. By the way, if you want to call in, 1-877-511-5483, 1-877-511-5483. But let's get to our final clip now. I think this is rather informative. And this is basically saying, like, put the safety stuff aside. There's also bigger issues at play here. And there are solutions that we can do that have nothing to do with GMOs. In fact, solutions to the entire system that ought to be looked at instead of keeping this current system and propping propping up these GMOs as something that is necessary, here it is.
So we know that GMOs are safe to use and in some instances can be applied in beneficial ways. Then what's the issue? The real problem with GMOs is not actually GMOs themselves, but the industrial farming system behind them. We're using GM foods to bolster an unsustainable system. One of the more popular GM varieties of crops in the US, Monsanto's Roundup Ready seed, exemplifies this interwoven nature of GMOs and industrial agriculture. From corn to soybeans to sugar beets, the Roundup Ready plants are resistant to the herbicide glyphosate, which is commonly referred to as Roundup. This resistance means that farmers can indiscriminately spray over their fields without worrying about damaging their crops. As a result, glyphosate use has skyrocketed in the US. Toxic runoff from overspraying is causing dead zones throughout US waterways, and Monsanto, which is now owned by the German company Bayer, not only profits off their Roundup Ready seeds, but receive bumper profits from the additional increase in glyphosate demand. To top it off, companies like Bayer patent and restrict seed saving, claiming that the research and development of these seeds takes time and money. This means that not only are seeds more expensive because one company has a monopoly on them, but also once a farmer has bought seed, they're not allowed to practice seed saving to cut costs in the next year. The problem with GMOs then is that it allows for a system in which just a few companies hold immense power over our food supply. Through that power, these companies perpetuate a food system wherein highly toxic chemical sprays are the only solution to pests and weeds. Just a few quote-unquote perfect and uniform crops trump a variety of diverse plants, and size is valued over taste. At the end of the day, GMOs are just a technology. They're not a food system. So GMOs, like most technologies, can do good when used in a just, ethical, and sustainable manner. But unfortunately, in our modern agricultural system, the history of GMOs is fraught with unsustainable applications, and they most often fall into the wrong hands. Just 4 companies control 60% of the seed market, and thus can influence what food is grown. GMOs, however, might be able to help us tackle issues like climate change by transferring traits from the American chestnut, a carbon storage powerhouse, into other plants or crops. But they are a small part of a much larger needed overhaul of our food system. GMOs are not a silver bullet to climate change, hunger, or drought. And while it is important to continue exploring genetic engineering, it's equally essential to relearn and foster a more ethical relationship with our land and food. In fact, for many of the problems that GMOs seek to solve, we already have solutions. Agroforestry, integrated weed and pest management systems, no-till, and polycultural systems represent just a few of the diverse paths forward. And not only are these techniques sustainable, but they can also increase yields, create more durable crops, and suck carbon from the air. Within these systems, GMOs might have a place, but not until they are produced as public goods, untethered from the bonds of patents and large multinational corporations.
All right, so a lot in there in that video, but what I like about it is that it's basically saying, look, we can think outside the box. There's other paths forward here. And I don't think I agree with everything that it is saying necessarily about GMOs and being safe. It's taking that for granted in the beginning, whereas, look, I think there's some major red flags here, even around the safety from what I'm seeing. But again, this is a video that is produced from someone, I think you can tell, that is more left-leaning, certainly when it comes to climate change and what they believe about that. And so it is an area where I think we've got some common ground with folks that we would otherwise maybe be divided on many areas with, that we agree that we want to have these big monopolies, these elite groups that are in charge of our food supply, and we want to get back to more of a principle of subsidiarity where things are more local. And I think we agree with a lot of people I think there's a lot of common ground on this besides the powers that be. And so I think it's good to be talking about this and be building some common ground across various divisions. And who knows what people might discover as we begin talking commonly on this line. Maybe they'll also come to see, well, yeah, you know what? Actually, we better get back to what is natural as well and stop murdering babies and stop pumping our bodies with contraceptive hormones and all these other crazy things that we're doing that have been sold to us by the powers that be that are in charge of these various systems in our nation, and get back to truth, get back to goodness, get back to doing things in a right and good way, and to try to build on that common ground here with some of those folks, I think would be a good thing. Becky, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I thought it was a really good video. Yeah, like you said, there's some things that we're knocking on with that side, especially regarding change. It kind of lays it out there that, look, we have other options. And so if this is dangerous in any way, why aren't we, diving into that option over there? Probably because there's not a lot of money to be made. It's different than what they want. They have a plan. Those 4 organizations that are like the top, I don't know what it said. It was like the top 4 companies that own all the seeds in the United States. I think that's what it was. And one of them was a Chinese organization, which in my mind is a red flag, altogether. Why would a Chinese organization own some of the largest amount of seeds in the United States? And so that's concerning. We should have the say ourselves. It should be the small businesses, the small farmers. It should be local the way it was before. And that's been lost. And I think that's so unfortunate for us and for our communities because it's not there anymore. And I do think there are people starting to come back into that. And I think that's a really good thing. And I would love to see it flourish in that way and get rid of all of the big stuff. Get rid of like the huge grocery chains. I mean, that can be good to an extent, but it's so unnecessary. We have so many options available. It's just unnecessary. It would eliminate so many issues, especially with obesity and diabetes, for all the health issues that are going on. It seems to make sense in my mind, but I know there's no money in it. So
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've even seen some of these urban initiatives where they're building big gardens even throughout cities, and having the neighborhood kind of come around this garden, build it, and have some food together. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim and Becky Havens here. If you want to connect with some of those great resources that Becky has for you, you can go to safehavensmama.com. That's her website, safehavensmama.com. Also, last chance to get any question or comment in. If you want to give us a call right now, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. So Becky, the big question here, I guess, at the end is, if we want to avoid these GMOs, what can we do? It seems like maybe the ideal is if we had a local farmer that was doing it the right way, all organic, keeping the pesticides out of it and not using the GMOs. And we could know this farmer, trust this farmer, and be able to have this good relationship and source of food that way. That seems to be the ideal, but that seems like that's a pretty far removed reality, maybe for most people. Doesn't mean maybe we shouldn't be seeking it out, and maybe there's a chance we could make that happen. But also, what are kind of the steps in that direction? At least, I guess I would say the first one would be, seems like it always comes back to, when it comes to food and our diets, to stop eating the ultra processed foods, the processed foods. That's where we're going to find a lot of this GMO stuff. But also, even with the labeling, the organic labeling, hard to know 100% what that really is. Does it really not contain any GMOs? Well, it would at least be a step closer to that, even if it's not 100% organic. Some of the organic labeling might be 95% organic. It's still better than 100% GMO products or whatever it is. So that's kind of a step in the right direction as well. But I don't know, any help, any advice you have for us in terms of trying to address this problem just on the local level, the very local level, the lowest local level, which is our own families and ourselves?
Right. I think if you're really serious about it, then I would just say it's time to get back into the kitchen and just start working on, by yourself. That's where it starts, is with you. And if you want to make these changes and be serious about it with your family, it's going to start with you. And so there's so much information out there. There's so many good recipes. Look, it's really easy to buy like a loaf of bread from the store. And to buy like some processed foods here and there. It's so easy to do that. And I think that's what we're used to. And I think that's the biggest difficulty, is that it's quick, it's easy, but it's because we've lost the art of baking and cooking and community in that way, where we're going outside of the home looking for those things. We're going outside of the home, to get involved in things. It's not really like in the home anymore. And so you find yourself out and about for the day. And so you're going to go and grab maybe fast food or stop at the grocery store and get sandwiches. And yes, it's easy and it might be quick, but it's obviously not the healthiest way. So there are some great, women who have public and larger platforms out there who are bringing, this kind of cooking and baking back into the home. And I think it's really beautiful. And I'll go on their accounts and kind of see that, they have taken up the art of, sourdough bread, or just baking, 1 or 2 days in the week and using it for leftovers. And that way everything is made from scratch and at home. I think we look at it in the wrong way, like, well, this is going to take me so much time and I don't have time, and I want it to be easy. But I just think it's just, if we switch our perspective and we get back to that, I think, many years ago, that wasn't even a thing. That's obviously what they did. They were much smaller communities. Not everybody lived close to a city. There were not grocery stores like many, many years ago. And so if we can kind of get back to that lifestyle, I don't think we're that far off. I don't think it's that difficult. I think that we probably use a lot of excuses to make life easier, and I get that because I do it too. But I think that it really can be a really good thing, especially if you get your kids involved. And I think it's just changing the way that we do things. It actually could be really easy. And then as far as like plugging into local things, I don't know any town, even small towns, that don't have like a local farmers market on the weekend, or, 1 or 2 days a week that they couldn't plug into. And it benefits everybody in those situations. It benefits the farmers, it benefits the communities, it's going to benefit your family. And there really is something about, getting to know your neighbors, getting to know your local farmers. I mean, that's what's going to be in season for your area. And you don't have to go to the store and get like every single type of exotic fruit that there is. That can be, a luxury and a gift at times, but it's totally not necessary. And supporting your local farmer, like, they should be sold out after the farmer's market. They should have no veggies or fruit left. They should be going home empty. The demand should be greater. And I just don't think that that's the case anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What can you tell us? I know you've looked into this some, and we've had some experience with it, but you have all the knowledge on it. I really have none of it, which is you can get some shares with local farmers, right? Where you get like a bag of produce once a week, or even you can set up maybe something where you can get a certain amount of meat. So how does that work? Anything you can share with us on how do you find those things, and what's been your experience?
Yeah, there's something called a CSA share, and you can do, vegetables, you can do meat, and it really is coming from local farms. Sometimes the farms come together and offer one. Sometimes it's just one farm. We've been a part of these at times, and it's so convenient for people who aren't able to garden themselves, or who can't make it to the local farmers market that many times a week. And basically you pick up a box of produce, fresh produce, seasonal fruit, Sometimes the farm even makes their own bread or has cows, so you're getting butter or different kind of staples that, the eggs and such that you can add onto your order and things like this. When you can find something like that, that is so wonderful. Then you get the box and then you figure out, okay, what do I need? What are the small things I might need to put together some meals at the grocery store? Not like everything's coming from the grocery store, but just maybe the small things. But if you just look up a CSA nearby, look for organic, non-GMO, look at how they practice their farming and who the family is. And usually you have some options. And then there's meat shares as well. You can buy, like most farms will let you buy like half a cow, half a pig, and you just need a hefty freezer to store it. And there's your meat. You know what I mean? You're going to save more and you're going to be going to the store less and you're going to be supporting the farmers instead. And so I feel like those are such great things to plug into in the community.
Mm-hmm. And so how would you know if there were GMOs involved? You'd have to ask, and I guess it would have to have some sort of a certified organic label. Is that how you would know? And then is that going to make things a lot more expensive?
No, most times it'll say on the website, like most CSAs, to be honest, are in that direction. They are doing this because they know people want organic, non-GMO food. Sometimes the organic label for a smaller business is really expensive to get it. There's a lot of paperwork you have to go through to get organic certified. And so they will claim like, we use organic practices, but we've foregone the certification in order to put more money back into farming techniques or to buy an extra cow or to, have more plants. So we've done that as well where it's not certified organic, but getting to know them and knowing their practices, it's actually sometimes way better than organic. It's organic, like on steroids. They're doing so much more. And that might be your best bet too. It's all about just like digging in what's in your community, what's local to you. Ask other people in your neighborhood. Go into different groups that you're in and see what other people are doing. And you will definitely find a ton of information that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So at the end of the day, there's going to be some level of trust that we have to extend to people. I'd rather extend it to somebody that I can look in the eyes and shake their hand in my local community than try to extend it to these big companies that we already know are involved in all kinds of things. And there's all sorts of red flags around. So yeah, I think principle of subsidiarity here, get as local as we can with all this. Becky, any final comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you can check out, if you want to grow seeds yourself and you want to do heirloom seeds, go to St. Clair Heirloom Seeds. They are awesome.
God bless you.